All right, friends, let's take a second, jump into some Torah. And I wanted to dedicate today's Torah in memory of a beloved friend who just died last year. You might know the name Helen Nash, Zichrona Livracha, of blessed memory. If you do know it, you might know that she was a very famous chef. She had many recipe books. She had a tremendous personal story, and the gift of her life was not only through that beautiful, aesthetic, artistic way of preparing and presenting food, but also with the depth of her Jewish commitment, certainly to her family. I'm blessed to be friends with some of them, as well as to the Jewish world through an amazing philanthropic commitment that she and her beloved husband of blessed memory, Jack, ran together and now continues doing very, very sacred work in ways that are known and ways that are not known. I had the blessing of learning the Torah portion with Helen every week for 6 years. And she and I would love Torah and also laugh sometimes and be puzzled. She would use words like, that's very peculiar, that's very strange. And especially when we came to one of the topics contained in this week's Torah portion, she would say such a thing. Helen was a precious chavruta of mine, a thought partner, a friend whose charm was inescapable. Really, really beautiful human being. Dedicate today's Torah learning to the memory of Helen Nash. In Parshat Reeh, we have a section, it's the 14th chapter of the book of Devarim, which is all about kashrut. And this is where Helen's face would be delighted, because she was so personally invested in the preparation and appreciation of food that whenever we came to the words describing kashrut, she would wonder why. And it's so important for us to honor the question. And the simple answers are not good enough. So for instance, here's the beginning of the kashrut laws, and they are repeated a few times in the Torah, but here in Parshat Reeh, it's chapter 14 of the book of Deuteronomy. The general rule in verse 3 of chapter 14 is Lo tochal kol to'eva. Do not eat anything that is a to'eva. And to'eva is a word that the Torah uses to describe how other peoples, other tribes worship. And so the introduction, just 2 verses before, is you shouldn't gash yourselves or shave the front of your heads because of the dead. And one of the things to know about all of this is that the rules in the Torah are often in response to the world. We are told to be kadoshim, to be holy, but that word kadosh also means designated. We are gods and gods alone. And so when you look at the rest of this chapter, you'll see that the reasons for kashrut is not for health purposes, which some people say. It's not because that food is better or better for you. In fact, there are lots of ways to be healthy using non-kosher ingredients, and there are plenty of ways to not be healthy using kosher ingredients. And so it isn't the promise of health, it is a commitment of a certain kind of food practice. Because we, in verse 2, are told, Ki am kadosh ata l'Adonai Elohecha. You are a special people to God. And God chose you from among all other people to be a segula, to be a treasure. But that treasure doesn't mean better. It means we belong. If you're in a loving relationship, and we're all in community, therefore you are, think about the people that are closest to you. You are special to them. Does that mean that you're better than anyone else? Of course not. Think about people that are precious to you. Does that mean that they are better than other people? They're probably very wonderful people, but they're not better. But they're yours. And that is incredibly important. When we read the rest of the rules of kashrut, it is really important for us to understand what is and is not being said. The Torah does not say, you are better, therefore this is what you eat. The Torah says, you're mine, and this is the food practice that you are to observe. We're told in verse 4, Zot ha-behima asher tochelu, shor se chsavim v'se izim. These are the animals that you may eat. And here's the list even beyond that verse. Ox, sheep, goat, deer, gazelle, roebuck, the wild goat, ibex, antelope, and the mountain sheep, and any other animal that has true hooves that are cleft in two, and choose their cud, you may eat. And then we're told ones that you may not eat. They're the ones that don't have the signs. And also for the swine, chazir, the pig, for although it has true hooves, it does not chew its cud. It is tamehu lachem. And tameh is another word that is often misunderstood. Tameh means not yours or not connectable in a holy way. It doesn't say something categorical about pork. It says not yours. And that is really important for us to understand. The distinction is here. Then we hear about the rules for fish that you may eat. Fins and scales is the rule there. Then we have the rules soon about the anything that flies, fowl. And it feels like any bird of prey. That's the definition. A bird of prey is not allowed for the rules of kashrut. So I want to share a teaching from someone that I've loved for a long time. Rabbi Jay Michelson was my Frisbee coach when we were younger at Camp Ramah in the Berkshires. And he's now a renowned writer and thinker, and he's a good person. And in his book, Non-Dual Judaism, the Everything is God, the Radical Path of Non-Dual Judaism. And he says something about this non-dual path, which he and others have defined as abandoning all sense of distinctiveness. Jay is a very interesting person who has tried, during different moments of his life, to shed all the identifiers to experience the world as a human without any of those adjectives. It's not entirely possible. We are who we are, and we're born into a circumstance. Our consciousness is shaped by the world that we inherit. Sometimes, and this is clearly what Abraham Joshua Heschel called a cancer of the eye, the color of our skin does change the way we walk through the world and the way we are seen as we walk through the world. But it is really important for us to understand that those are superficial differences because the essence of who we are is godly. So Jay writes in this very interesting book that along the non-dual path, I'm paraphrasing, he tried to shed all of those distinctions. And along the non-dual path, he learned, and wait for the whole sentence, that being Jewish and that Judaism is neither superior nor necessary. But it is superior and necessary for me, he says, because it is the vocabulary of my soul. Again, not better, but me. The reason for keeping kosher is that is what we do. That is who we are. And clearly there are many ways of keeping kosher. There's a great joke about this that is told in countless circles. The joke goes like this. God says, Moses, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And Moses says, okay, God, so what you're saying is we shouldn't have beef and milk together. God says, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. Moses says, okay, God, so what you mean is even chicken that doesn't produce milk should not be eaten with milk from another animal. God says, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. So Moses says, oh, so you mean that fish counts as parv, neither meat nor milk. Chicken is meat, and we have to wait 3 or 6 hours between having meat and milk. But if you have a dairy product, you can then rinse out your mouth and immediately afterwards have some meat. And we need 2 sets of dishes, and there needs to be a kosher certification on prepared foods. Is that what you're saying, God? And God says, have it your way. And the thing to understand about this joke, which has made the rounds for generations, is it's completely understandable that the mysterious rules of keeping kosher are obviously misunderstood and misexplained over and over because it just is so hard to understand. Why this animal and why that? You might say Well, because it has split hooves and it chews its cud. But then you have to ask yourself, so what? Why is that the point? And the Torah says, don't be like them, be yourself. And throughout Jewish history, these rules have developed over time, sometimes to be social distinctions, to keep Jews associating with Jews. There is power in this. There is power in this, but it isn't an ethical decision. Keeping kosher is not an ethical decision. Keeping kosher is a Jewish decision. It is an identifier to a Jew that we are who we are. It doesn't judge someone else for not being who I am, but it reminds me who I am. There are ethical dimensions, and I offer this one, not explanation for the why of kashrut, but an appreciation of what it could mean. I pay attention because I'm a Jew to what goes into my mouth. We are taught by later parts of Jewish tradition that just as we should be cautious about what goes into our mouth, we should be very cautious about what comes out. It is a mindful practice involving this part of our body, which means our speech should be kosher too. That should be an identifier for what it is to be a Jew. It's a beautiful, slightly removed teaching associated with kashrut. But I want to double down on the core point that I've been making now. It should be confusing. I'm seeing some of the questions you're posing. Kashrut is confusing, but only if you want it to make sense. Kashrut is not confusing if it isn't about making sense. Kashrut is me knowing who I am and our family having a tradition. That's the gift of kashrut. We have a mindful food practice. It's the Jewish way of eating, and that's the why. That might be dissatisfying if you're looking for a rational explanation. But there is no rational explanation. There's a cultural treasure. This is who we are. Aren't we lucky that we have ways of being that we've inherited and developed and even presented in the most exquisite of ways through the masterful art of culinary geniuses like Helen Nash, of beautiful and blessed memory. What we do with food should make us proud of who we are, how we share it, how we make it. And deep down, the experience of that mindful identifier should also influence the way that we show up in the world. Finding ways to say, I'm so proud to be with you, my Hindu sister and brother who will not have certain food, my Muslim sister and brother who will not have certain kinds of food, my Christian sister or brother who also certain days have certain kinds of food. The cuisine of faith is meant to be a point of pride for the community defined by that faith. I bless us, friends. This is a treasure of who we are. To appreciate being who we are. And to know that, of course, every identity comes with boundaries. This is what I do. This is what I don't do. But there's no judgment involved in that. It's just what I do. Isn't it beautiful to have something that is just ours? Let's send our hearts to the east, friends. Let's sing. Kol hod balevav pnima nefesh Yehudi homiya ulefatei mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia on lo avda תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ Tzion v'Yerushalayim. Am Yisrael Chai. See you tomorrow, my friends.